The IMF's fiscal monitor warns global debt could hit 100% of GDP by 2029, up from 83% in 2019, and may reach 123% in a high-risk scenario threatening long-term fiscal stability. Currently, the world's largest economy, the US, is adjusting to a recent AI investment surge, which has pushed up market valuations of US companies like nvidia. But the US deals with plenty of uncertainty.
And so here I want to flag that if you're comparing where we are with the US economy to a year ago, October 24, we're seeing less growth and more inflation. So the signs of, if you want, a negative supply shock. That's how we would describe it in our lingo.
The IMF urges lasting fiscal reforms to stabilize debt, advising low-revenue nations to boost taxes and efficiency. In 2025, China holds $756 billion in US debt, about 2.1% of the $37 trillion national debt total. The Federal Reserve owning most of the debt, thus making it largely manageable.
We are concerned that the ability of the Chinese economy to continue growing out of the external sector in an environment that is becoming very, very complicated is not guaranteed. So the Chinese economy, our diagnosis remains the same. There needs to be a pivot from an externally driven engine of growth to a domestic driven one.
Debt is not all bad. It supports growth, stability, and flexibility. Governments borrow to fund services and boost productivity. Low interest rates make borrowing cheaper than repayment, as seen in the US and Japan. Despite having a debt to GDP ratio near 250%, Japan maintains debt due to low interest rates and domestic ownership of its bonds. Sovereign debt is easier to manage than private debt, since the creditors can't seize government property. Repaying all debt could cut public support, slow innovation, and hurt startups, stifling growth unless offset by smart policies. The Economic Brief, DD India.
And let's talk to Professor Banik once again about debt in general. Professor Banik, is debt even, at 100% a problem? Because it's not like it's ever going to be paid back. And there may be a time also in the future when interest rates are so low that evergreening will be quite manageable.
Yeah, it depends upon where you are using the debt. Now, if you look at the world at this point of time, if I look into US, the debt as a percentage of GDP is almost 140%. China, the debt is almost 115% of GDP. Same for Japan, France, Germany, UK, all these economies. Now, if you look into the factors which are contributing to the piling of debt, it has to do more with not so productive type of investment. It all started with COVID when countries around the world, there was a necessity for fiscal incentive just to prop up the economy, and the debt started piling up since then. After COVID, you also have things like the war,
yes.
Russia-Ukraine war, you have the war in the Middle East, and the war is costly in the sense that it actually increases the price of universal input, which can be in the form of vegetable oil that we take for our food,
right.
or in the form of petrol and diesel. The third thing, and which is very important, is if I look into the demography as a factor for most of the European economy, as well as for China and to some extent for the US,
right.
You will find that the working age population, they are actually have retired. And this is particularly true for Western Europe and the Japanese and the South Korean economy. Okay. What does that mean? Because they have a strong trade union in place, you have a big portion of the working age population who are now not working, they are actually laying their hand on the pension system.
Yes.
Now, you have a scenario where people are not working,
yes.
but you have to give subsidies in the form of pension and other doles.
Right. Professor Banik, we are running short of time, so let me just fit in another question. We look at India. Should India be looking at, to fund its infrastructure mainly through debt, because we're talking about Viksit Bharat by 2047? Currently, our debt to GDP ratio is only about 83%, and it's projected to remain stable.
Yeah. So in India, as you mentioned, given the other numbers which I've just now spoken, 83 looks very nice. And the moment you mentioned that India is investing, the capital expenditure is towards what we call productive investment, because you are building road, ports, And the multiplier effect of this, the back of the envelope calculation shows it is around 2.5 because 60% of our demand is driven by consumption. So if I look into the marginal propensity to consume as 0.6, it implies that the multiplier effect is almost 2.5, which means if the government or for that matter 100 rupees is being spent,
Yes.
it ends up creating almost 250 rupees of income. And the good thing about India is our demographic because the
Yes.
median age is only 28 as opposed to other countries which I mentioned where because of the higher their retiring age population, they have to spend more money on two so-called pension type activities which are not that productive. So looking into that lens, I think in
Yes.
India we have big hope and the economy will continue to sustain the present growth
We'll have to
momentum.
leave it there. Thank you very much, Professor Banik. Thank you for joining us and helping us understand these stories in greater detail.